Alright, so this is a video about absolute advantage, which is a theory that is attributed to Adam Smith, writing in The Wealth of Nations in 1776. If you want to look this up in your book, it's Pugel, chapter 3, page 34 in the 16th edition, and if you have an earlier edition, you can find it in that general area. The assumptions of the model are that we have two countries, so we're going to use USA and Mexico, two goods, tomatoes and wheat. That's a departure from our earlier model where we had the market for one good. Obviously, this is more realistic because trade usually involves the exchange of commodities between countries. One factor of production, labor. So Adam Smith, writing in the 1700s, was using the labor theory of value, which you may have heard about if you know anything about Karl Marx. But that was the typical view of the time about the, where you derive the value of goods from. Goods are worth the amount of labor that is embodied in their production. So we have one factor of production, labor, and this is a barter economy. So if you want tomatoes, you'll have to give somebody some wheat, and if you want wheat, you'll need to give somebody some tomatoes. So if we look at this table over here, this is a table showing the unit labor requirement in the tomatoes and the wheat industry in the US and Mexico. And let's talk about what these numbers mean. 2 in the USA tomatoes spot means that it takes 2 hours, let's say the unit is hours, it takes 2 hours of US labor to make a pound of tomatoes. But in Mexico, it only takes 1 hour of Mexican labor to make a pound of tomatoes. And the opposite is true in terms of productivity. In the US, in the wheat industry, it takes 1 hour in the US to make a pound of wheat, and it takes 2 hours in Mexico to make a pound of wheat. So the unit labor requirement is how many hours does it take to make 1 unit of the good. Labor productivity is obviously an analogous concept. It's the opposite, if you like. So this says how much of the good can be produced in an hour of labor. So for example, if we know that it takes 2 hours to make a pound of tomatoes, then in the course of 1 hour, we could make half a pound of tomatoes. So we would say that labor productivity in the tomato industry in the US is half a pound of tomatoes per hour. So it's just a reciprocal of the unit labor requirement. And your book does this both ways, at least in the 16th edition. We're just going to use unit labor requirement in this video in the interest of time, but either way is fine, and some books do it the other way and not this way. Okay, so absolute advantage, it means being better at something. So the way we can tell is if we look at the tomato industry and we look at the two countries, we can see that it takes the US twice as long to make a pound of tomatoes as it does Mexico, because obviously 2 is twice as big as 1. So what we can say is that Mexico has an absolute advantage in the production of tomatoes. And for the wheat industry, we can see that the opposite is true, that the US takes an hour to make a pound of wheat, Mexico takes 2 hours, so we can say that the USA has an absolute advantage in the production of wheat. So if these two countries start trading, we would expect the USA to export wheat to Mexico in exchange for Mexican tomatoes. And what we're going to do in the next video is sketch out some production possibility frontiers and look at what happens when trade takes place between these two countries.